Hi there, this is Anna from Anna Aspinus Designs. Welcome back to a brand new video and a new collection of digital art designs. This week we are looking at ArtPlay Palette Narcissus collection, and I'm going to be sharing some thoughts about color considerations and changes that you can make to your digital art supplies. So first of all, I want to take a look at some of the products that are included in the collection before we move forward and deconstruct a layout by one of the members from the Anna Aspinus Designs creative team. This collection includes 5 products: the ArtPlay palette, an Artsy layered template, Linear FotoBlendz number 2, multimedia frames number 6, and Nostalgia Word Art Mix number 1. And in this particular collection, I also included a special bonus, and I'm always looking for ways to give back to the customers that purchase from my store on a weekly basis and support my new releases. And so with this particular ArtPlay palette collection, I included this bonus artsy paper plus a collection of 8 brushes that add on to the ArtPlay palette. So let's go ahead and take a look at the ArtPlay palette, delivered in 2 different folders. And I always begin with the paperie because this is really the foundation of the collection. The papers actually take me up to 2 days to create, so they're the most time-consuming part of the process, but also the most enjoyable. And you can see that we have a daffodil theme. I was inspired by the daffodils that come up in my garden every spring and get snowed out by the spring snowstorms that we have here in Colorado. They never quite make the frost and the cold weather, but I always love to see them come up. My mum planted them when we first moved into our home 10 years ago, and they've spread around the garden, and my mum's actually amazed that they still keep coming back, but they do despite the hardy weather. And so daffodils remind me of my mum. I always remember she grew them when I was growing up, and of course they're yellow as well, so that happens to be her favorite color. So this time of year, I always think of her and the daffodils. However, spring colors to me are very pastel-like, and I find that they're really difficult to match with photos. I don't have a lot of pastel-colored images, and so I lent more towards a neutral palette with a hint of blue and yellow, and then of course the orange. I played that up by incorporating the vintage brown and even this dark chocolate down here. So a little bit of a unexpected color palette for the theme, but I definitely try to design supplies that are going to coordinate with the majority of your photos. I think that it's much easier to design with a more muted, neutral palette. And then of course you do have the option in Photoshop to be able to change some of those colors, and I want to demonstrate that to you today in the layout deconstruct. So we have the 4 different artsy papers. I believe that this paper number 2 is my favorite. I love the dimension on that one. I always have a favorite paper. I like the contrast of the orange and the blue in this one. Blue happens to be one of my favorite colors, and I think because of all the blue skies that we have here in Colorado, I'm always drawn towards the blues and greens. But I definitely keep an eye on the colors of the ArtPlay palettes in the Anna Aspinus Design Store, as well as those that are popular, and I try to mix up the colors so that there are a variety of color offerings in the store at any given time. So that is the paper collection. Of course, we have the artsy papers, the solid papers, which you can then combine with the transfers and overlays. We have the elements. There's a number of dimensional elements. I apologize again for this black screen, but we have some of these elements. You can see we have a flower, we have a labeled word, we have this wooden mushroom element, and the button you can see in the back here. I'm not sure why Windows 10 does this, but it creates this strange background in the preview images sometimes. Sometimes you get this black image as well. highly annoying, but it is what it is. And then of course we have the dimensional elements that are included in PSD format with the drop shadow layer style, so that you can adjust the color of the shadow if you wanted to, or even the opacity. And then we have the brushes, and of course there are 16 different brushes, a variety of lace, blending brushes, there's a couple of lines here, there's a couple of flower brushes in the mix, and a variety of them all. So we've got some text, some lace, and some flowers here. Some more text at the top, a really nice edge. Again, I like these edge brushes to kind of go on the edge of a photo, so you could blend a photo with the edge and kind of put an imprint in there. You can use them to peek out behind frames. You can stamp them on the edges of your papers. You can use these, for example, to create a frame around your photo by rotating the brush by 90 degrees. And I love text brushes for adding into the blending of a photo. So when you're custom blending an image, then you can use this text to imprint into the image. There are 2 ABR files with this set, so these will therefore accommodate both Photoshop Elements and Photoshop users regardless of the version that you're using. And of course, if you purchase the entire collection and get the bonus, then you will get the 8 additional brushes, which takes your 16 brushes up to 24 brushes. And those brushes are named as such. And in fact, I've included the full brush set in the bonus collections. You don't actually have to assimilate both brush sets. That task has been done for you. So let's now head into our second folder and take a look at the transfers and overlays. Really love these. There is a variety of texture, color, paint. We've got some great splatters. Again, we've got this culmination of vintage and modern with the abstract paint, and then the ephemera that is incorporated into these transfers. Some of them have harsh edges, some of them don't. This is probably my favorite here. I love the paper dimension on this particular transfer, and the dark browns with the orange. It's really appealing to me. Some great text. Again, we've got the vintage flower with the more modern paint. Lovely piece of yellow here with some texture and some stains. So a variety of different elements. This particular text transfer works great with the blending modes. You can try and apply a blending mode such as color burn or linear burn, maybe overlay, even multiply, and then adjust the levels to perfect the results. And this particular stain here works really well with the color burn blending mode. Some splatters, and then we've got some lace textures, some more edges. So lots of different bits and pieces that you can simply open into your Photoshop or Elements workspace and then drag and drop onto one of those solid papers. And then we're going to move on to the Artsy layered template, which we're going to be working with in the layout deconstruct. So you can see that this is one of the Artsy papers with a gray foundational background and some circle frames, which I thought would work really well with some of the circles in the design of the papers. So we'll come back to that shortly. And then we have the Linear FotoBlendz. I showed you a couple of these a few weeks ago, but these are masks with blended edges to which you can clip your photos. And I've included 7 of these, and they are also in ABR format, so you can load them into your brushes panel and use them with the paintbrush tool in both Elements and Photoshop. And then we have the multimedia frames. There are 4 different frames, and these are designed to coordinate with the Linear FotoBlendz. So if you wanted to, you could go ahead and you could open up one of these frames into your workspace, and you can see all the different layers that you have here. You can actually remove the mask layer and then place this frame over the top of the coordinating photo blends. And then you also have the option to remove the beads from the frame if you wanted to. You could also remove the stitching. So lots of opportunity here to customize. And these frames were in response to a customer request for frames that aren't white. So I made an effort here to create some distressed brown frames so that that customer would be able to incorporate those into her designs. You can see I've also included all of those layers as individual PNG files for those of you that are not working in Adobe Photoshop or Photoshop Elements. And then finally, we have the Word Art collection. Really love this font, and I've had a lot of requests to start including font information with Word Art, and I will start doing that in the next collection. So you can look forward to a small note within the product that tells you what the fonts are that I've used. This one is a free font, and I can't remember off the top of my head what it is, but it's a great font. And a variety of word art. We've got the word transfers, which I love so much, and then some wooden words, which are super fun as well to add to your page designs, and also a beaded thread here, nostalgia. Usually I go horizontal with the stitching, and so this time it was a little bit different to take a vertical approach, and this is obviously designed to go with the design of the template. You can see here it works really nice down this line here that runs through this particular page. So that's the collection that we are going to be using. The other thing that I just briefly want to talk about before we move on to the layout deconstruct are the complementary digital art supplies that come a week after the collection is released. I have been doing for a long time these ArtsyTransfers, and these are essentially the transfers and overlays which are delivered in PSD format so that you can access the individual layers, you can use them independently, and you can also recolor any of those layers. So that gives you lots of flexibility, and this is what they look like. You can open up one of those ArtsyTransfers into your workspace. It has a transparent background, and then you have access to all of the individual layers in the layers panel that make up that particular transfer. Just recently, I brought back the ArtsyKArdz, and if you look back to a few videos, there is a whole video showing you how you combine these layered cards. They're actually delivered in both PSD and JPEG formats. You can just print them out and use them in your paper scrapbooking or crafting projects, or you can combine them with your photos in Photoshop to create some really cool effects. And I'll be sure to link the videos on how to use ArtsyTransfers and ArtsyKArdz in this video below. This week I have also introduced these DoubleMaker Paperies, and I got a request for a customer to actually create some coordinating artsy papers that go with the artsy papers in the ArtPlay palette. So for example, we have artsy paper number 1 here, and then this has been created as a secondary page to that paper so that you can create a double page spread. These were actually really time consuming to create, and so the longevity of this product range is really going to be dependent on how popular they are in the store. But you can see this was the original artsy paper number 2, and then I've created this complementary page on the left here so that when you create a double page spread that's going to be printed in a photo book or an album, then you've got a nice cohesive flow of design from left to right. So this is the third one. This was the original paper, and then this is the add-on. Really like this one. I like all of the curves in it and the distribution of the colors. And then finally the last one here. So you only get the 4 papers here. The idea is that this DoubleMaker Narcissus Paperie adds on to the ArtPlay Palette Collection. So this brings us to the end of the preview of the supplies. I'm now going to go into my Photoshop workspace, and we're going to deconstruct this layout that has been created by Joan Robillard, who is one of the newer members of the Anna Aspenus Designs team, and I think this is her granddaughter, I'm not entirely sure. But you can see how she has changed the colors of her digital art supplies to coordinate with the cooler tones in her photos. So I'm just going to go ahead and access that Artsy layered template and just bring it in just so that you can see what the original looks like. See if I can get it to open into Photoshop. So let's drag it into the background here. And so you can see that we've gone from very warm tones with browns and neutrals and oranges to more cooler tones. So we're looking at yellows, greens, and blues. And so there are a couple of different ways that you're going to want to change the color of your digital art supplies. And I get asked about this all the time, so I'm going to address it in this video. So she's started off with solid paper number 1 as her foundation, and then she's made various changes to the digital art supply layers that are included in the template. So we have this white stain layer, which she's kept as is, and then we've got this transfer here, which she's recolored. If we go ahead and just pull up that transfer here, you can see that the original template had this doily in the background here, and she's brought this transfer in from the ArtPlay palette, and it looks like she's recolored it. And when you're working with a transfer or an element that has a number of different colors, then you're going to want to use the hue and saturation slider in order to change those colors. So in Photoshop, you're going to go to Image, Adjustments, Hue and Saturation. In Photoshop Elements, you're going to go to Enhance, Adjust Color, Hue and Saturation, and then you're going to move the hue slider, and you can see how you can make this more green, or you can make it more red, and you can really go through the different colors of the rainbow. You can also change the saturation, so that makes it more muted by bringing the lever to the left, or you can make it more saturated, much brighter. You can also change the lightness. I don't tend to use this feature as much. My preference is to go to Image Adjustment Levels in Photoshop Elements, that is Enhance, Adjust Lighting Levels, and then change the lightness that way. So you can increase the shadows, you can increase the highlights, and you can see how you can make minor adjustments there. And then we have the embossed layer here, and then there was a stain here that was brown. If we go back to our template, I keep minimizing it, but we have this brown stain here. She has changed that to green. And so when you're changing the color of stains or single color elements without dimension, then you are going to use the Edit Fill color option. So you're going to go to Edit, Fill. You want to ensure that you have that Preserve Transparency option checked. And let's say, for example, we want to select a blue. We're going to go to our color option in the contents, and then we're going to select a blue that we think might work. You can either sample from your layout. There aren't really any blues here to sample from, so I'm just going to kind of eyeball it, go with a bright color, and then once you've got the color that you want, you're going to click OK, and then you're going to click OK, and you can see now that we've been able to change that paint stain to blue. If, for example, we go to Edit Fill, and this is the same command in Photoshop Elements, and you forget to check that Preserve Transparency box and then click OK, it's going to flood your entire layout with color. So make sure you check that box when you are recoloring elements. So just to recap, you're going to use hue and saturation to recolor if your element has dimension or if it's of multicolor nature. You're going to use the Edit Fill option for single color, no texture elements, and this is particularly true for brushes. So now we've got this daffodil, and you can see she's changed the color of that. We've got more of a green tone in the brown than the warmer colors, and more of a yellow. So she's used the hue and saturation to change that one, and then we've got this transfer that's got a blue color overlay, and she's used the hue and saturation for that. And then we've got the paper texture on top of that. So even though a brush appears as though it has texture, it's actually a flat element. So you can still go ahead and go to Edit, Fill, and then say, for example, I want to make that more of a brown instead of a purple. I'm going to select that color, ensure I have the Preserve Transparency box checked, and then click OK. And now you can see it still maintains that dimension. And then finally, there's a small transfer down at the bottom here. So this becomes the foundation of her page. And then she added in some dimensional elements. And again, you can see that she has changed the color of the lace. And again, she's done this by going to Image, Adjustments, Hue and Saturation. In Photoshop Elements, that's Enhance, Adjust Color, Hue and Saturation. And you can see how you can change the slider to change the color of the lace. Because this is a dimensional element and has dimension, real dimension to it, if I were to go to Edit, Fill, and then fill that with color, so we had brown selected, and click OK, then you can see we lose that dimension, it goes flat. So very important that you use the hue and saturation for dimensional elements. We have another piece of lace here that's been recolored, and then we have a variety of art strokes. So you can see that we have a stain that's in green here, so she's used the Edit, Fill to color that stain because it's a brush. Same with the overlays. And then there is a splatter white. You would use the Edit, Fill to recolor splatters. The same with art strokes. So all of these paint markings can be recolored simply using the Edit, Fill option. And then finally we have the frames, and I chose circle frames, and I love how obviously the photos coordinate with the colors in her supplies. So you essentially have two choices. You can choose your supplies to coordinate with the photos, or you can pick your photos to coordinate with the supplies. And if one of those isn't working, then you can use these coloring tools in Photoshop in order to make those necessary adjustments. I did have a question about recoloring frames. I often get asked how to change the color of a frame to a different color. And you can do this simply by selecting the Move tool from the Tools panel, ensure you have the Auto Select option checked, and then you're going to click on that frame to select it. Alternatively, you can go and locate the frame in your Layers panel, and then you're going to go to Edit, Fill, and then you're going to ensure that Preserve Transparency box is checked, and then you're going to click OK. And that's the simple way to create a colored frame. Now what this does, of course, as I have previously noted, is that it takes away any texture that might be in your frame. So if you wanted a more textural approach, then you could essentially use one of the solid papers. So say, for example, I wanted to use brown, I could go back to my ArtPlay Palette Narcissus Paperie folder, and then I could bring in perhaps this chocolate brown paper and pull it into our workspace. And then you want to make sure that you move it so that it's directly on top of the frame. So I'm going to place it on top of that frame that we just recolored. And then you're going to go to Layer, Create Clipping Mask. And now if you go ahead and zoom in, you can see that the frame adopts the texture that's on the paper. So it's another way that you can recolor those frames. And I kind of like how we have a differentiation between the frames by having a dark and a light. It creates some contrast in the design. And then Joan completed her layout by adding a title. Down at the bottom here, she used the placement marker in the template to place her title, and then she simply added her journaling in her text boxes. So the text boxes were provided. She simply selected those text boxes and then typed in her own words. So really cool layout there. I really liked how she has manipulated the digital art supplies and made them work for her photos. And I think that it's a great example of having an ArtPlay palette that maybe has an unexpected color palette, then you have the opportunity in Photoshop in order to be able to use the tools to wield the colors to make them suit you. You may prefer a more traditional palette or perhaps something a little bit more offbeat like myself. So before we go ahead and complete this video, I want to just show you a couple more examples of pages that were created by the Anna Aspenus Designs team. You can see the same template here being featured by Viv. She's actually moved the focal point of the template over to the left slightly. She's added in some different transfers, and she's really kind of added some visual weight using transfers and ArtsyTransfers on the right hand side of the page. And she's removed one of those frames. But again, she has recolored the different components of the artistry in order to really work with her photos. So very cleverly done there. And then we have Mikey, who has used the ArtPlay palette as I had intended it to. And of course, her theme doesn't have anything to do with daffodils, but has more to do with an autumn theme. So there's no reason why you couldn't take this spring ArtPlay palette and turn it into a full page. And then finally, I really like how Margot has used the two DoubleMaker papers. I really like how she's used the notebook brushes to sort of knit the two pages together. And notice here how she's used that same coloring technique to recolor one of the frames on her papers. So really fun ideas here for coloring. I guess bottom line is that just because an ArtPlay palette has a specific color palette doesn't mean to say that you're tied to those colors, because the options in Photoshop really make it easy for you to manipulate those colors and make them work for your photos. And really that is the bottom line, is that you want to have digital art supplies that support your photos. They should never compete with your photos. When you look at a piece of artistry or a digital scrapbooking page, it should be the photos that shine first, and then the digital art supplies are merely there to support and showcase those images. So if you have any questions about this video, please don't hesitate to contact me. I can be reached at anna@annaaspenusdesigns.com. If you're interested in learning more about coloring techniques, I have a workshop in the store at annaaspenusdesigns.com, and I'll link that in the video below. And I think we can just about call that a wrap. I really hope you enjoy this collection. I will be back in this space again soon. In the meantime, take care. Bye-bye.